Hello, everyone, and welcome to OC Live, a weekly broadcast on blockchain branded tokens and token economies. We feature weekly guests to discuss the latest in blockchain and the current projects that they are working on. And with us today, we have Nicolas Van Hoorde. He is the co-founder and CEO of Delta. Delta is a cryptocurrency portfolio tracker and has grown to be one of the most popular cryptocurrency portfolio trackers. Some of you might be familiar with other trackers such as Blockfolio, and that's sort of what we're going to be discussing today is different cryptocurrency trackers and a little bit about growth and how it works. So before we get into that, Nicolas, welcome to OC Live.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So let's start off with your background. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself before launching Delta and how you came to get in the space.
Sure, I think, well, if we go all the way back, I basically studied computer science, and even though I would say was okay at developing and programming, I never felt I was particularly good at it or something I would excel in. And it was always, I would say, in me somehow to try new things, try new concepts, start new products. But at the time when I was studying computer science, I didn't even know there was a position for that. But luckily during my internship, I actually got offered, basically at the end of the internship, I said, okay, I kind of don't want to do this anymore, this developing. And the company I did my internship with said, but based on what you're saying, maybe product management is something you would like. And it was actually right up my alley, I would say. And that way I got into, I would say, more experience into working on a product from a conceptual phase and making sure it grows and everything, having a good UI and UX. And I would say after a couple of years of working at various companies, I basically got to talk to one of the lead developers at my last job, and basically one of my friends. And we were discussing, I would say, early 2017, okay, what we're going to do with our savings. And we looked into stocks and cryptocurrencies. And just from since he, even though he's a developer, he's also very much I would say product focused. He's very much an entrepreneur, and we started talking. And then in crypto was basically one of those things that looked very interesting, not just from a financial point of view, but just as an entire, let's look at the space and where we can bring value. And since we were both not really happy at the company we were working, we were basically thinking, okay, maybe we should do something. And we were using, after our initial investments into crypto, using Blockfolio. And while we liked it a lot, we felt like, okay, I think we can do something better. Yeah, we naturally believed in that, and we started working on it. And the thing is, we went to the founders of the company where we worked at, and we said, okay, we kind of want to leave and work on this thing. And they liked, I would say, both the idea and the people as much that they decided to actually help us found this thing. And so basically everybody involved, that the founders of the previous company and then myself and Philip founded the Delta company, which is actually called Opus Labs, but we only have one product, which is Delta.
Great. So this was in 2017 when you started working on Delta?
Yeah, I think so. We first started talking about it. So our first investments, I would say, is March. Then we started talking about, okay, can we bring, like, it was quite underdeveloped even today, but then even more. I would say that in May-ish, June, we started talking about it, and then we made a decision in summer, and then August, we started working on it for real. And then 1st of October, the V1 of Delta got launched.
So before, seems to be going on a little glitch here, don't mind that. So before we get into portfolio tracking, maybe you can tell us about Delta, maybe for those who haven't heard of it, and what it is and how it compares to, I guess we'll get into how it compares later on. So basically, what is Delta? And I guess something else you have is Delta Direct.
So first of all, Delta it's a portfolio tracking application for investors that have invested in cryptocurrency. And what problem are we solving? It's very simple. If you're an investor in cryptocurrency, and especially if you have a diversified portfolio, it's very hard to keep track of everything, of all your investments and the current worth, what the profit or loss is, based on how the space works with all these different exchanges and coins being available on one exchange but not available on the other. So that main problem is what Delta tried to solve, and that was basically the starting point for us. And of course, then we try to add extra value, try to help investors analyze their portfolio, help investors make better investment decisions, offering the markets and everything. And then indeed, I think around our 1 year anniversary, which is October 2018, we launched Delta Direct, which is a way to allow token teams to connect with our users, basically. So we have around 1.2 million users, and Delta Direct allows, I would say now, 375 token teams to send updates to those that are subscribed to the token team. And it's an interesting way of basically connecting the entire space together, so investors and the teams. And it's also the route we're taking in our 2.0 release, which is planned for later this week, maybe even today, and will allow for basically to have users not only already get notified or interact with token teams that they already are invested in, but actually allow a way of discoverability. So projects that are delivering and communicating in a good and frequent way actually also reach a potential new audience. And I think that's something where we can bring new value to the cryptocurrency scene.
Great. So I guess the idea here is that switch my camera here. Might be a little less quality now, but the other one is glitching. Hopefully this is better. So the idea here is that there is there's people have cryptocurrency in a lot of different places, and such as maybe different exchanges in different cold storage units, such as a Ledger Nano S. So the idea is with a portfolio tracker, you have not your actual cryptocurrency in one place, but you have sort of the data of that cryptocurrency in one place, so you can track it. And one thing that I want to get into is when starting off. So I guess the first portfolio tracker that I used in cryptocurrency was CoinCap, which at the time was one of the more it was out there, and I think that one was by Shapeshift. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the portfolio trackers that existed when you were beginning to build Delta.
Yeah, there were not that many, actually. I think currently there are so many portfolio trackers out there, but when we first launched, it was basically, like you mentioned, it was Blockfolio was definitely known. Coins Live, I think, was also one of those first ones, Coinfolio, and that was basically it. Also, I would say that Crypto Compare, which didn't have a mobile app, but also had portfolio and still has portfolio tracking tools on their website, but it was not really an experience you could easily get into on your phone. So the market was much less crowded, and that's why also for us bringing Delta to the space made a lot of sense, because we basically saw there was so much value to add, and in the space where we're operating, where you can actually have an overview on a per transaction basis, there was no other competitor back then apart from Blockfolio, which was around for, I think when we launched, for more than 2 years already. So we knew before we started they had a massive head start, and we were unlikely to bridge the gap in any short term, and maybe ever. And I think we didn't even expect to come as close as we are today. And yeah, we are just happy with how we can create value for our users. So it was never our intention to have the most of this or the most of that. It was more about quality than quantity. And of course, by bringing quality, the quantity naturally followed, and is still what keeps us makes us a successful app today.
Great. So when you first started, Blockfolio was already around. It already had a large user base. It was already a huge app, and you were starting off. So I guess you already said it. You didn't expect to quite become a competitor in a way to Blockfolio like today.
But I think we didn't expect to compete that quickly. I think we launched in October, and in January we were already at 500,000 users, which was insane for us, to be honest. It's like a fun behind the scenes story, but when in Belgium, you have to actually submit your financial plan and forecasts to the notary to be able to actually found a company. And when we founded the company, we expected 50,000 users after 1 year, and we basically got 500,000 after 3 months. So it was an insane time for us. And of course, the market had a lot to do with it, or time to market had a lot to do with it. And that combined with the fact that Delta was, of course, deemed very good just in terms of quality. Yeah, that made us get to a position where we were able to grow very fast. And the fact that we were growing fast also meant that we had to actually scale up very quickly and unexpectedly. So I remember countless nights of being awake and making sure our servers could cope, because we were not planning for such a huge growth. So it was scary but exciting at the same time.
Yeah, that is absolutely tremendous growth in a short amount of time. And I guess you said already, you sort of attribute part of that as part of the timing in the market. And so what else do you attribute that to as far as the success and growth of Delta, not only during that growth period, but as far as it being a consistently growing app until today?
Well, I think there are a couple of elements, but the two I would pick out is user interface and innovation we brought to the space. So user interface, I think, especially in the beginning and even today, I would say that most of the applications out there are what I like to call it's designed by engineers, which means that it works great, but there hasn't been really a thought process of how would a user use it in the most optimal way. And that's completely different for how we worked. We actually started by making sure that everything user interface related was nailed down, and then we actually got to the part where we made it all work. And that's actually also why we were able to win the Webby Award for Best Mobile App User Interface in 2018. So that's definitely something we're very proud of. And then innovation, and I wouldn't, without wanting to sound arrogant, it's mostly in the details, I would say. Like, I think Delta, or I know that Delta was the first where you could say it's a problem that nobody thinks about today anymore, but I would say 1 year and a half ago, when you use a portfolio tracking app, you had to, when you bought Bitcoin or you bought NEO with Bitcoin, you had to enter a buy transaction for NEO, a sell transaction for Bitcoin. And what we basically were able to do was say, okay, you can just add toggle this thing which has deduct from transactions, and you only had to do once. Now we added the option to add custom coins, so you could already add your ICO investments. When the coin from the ICO became tradable, you could easily merge it into your other coins. So it was like we basically were able to, with a few nuances, made a big difference. And I think that was actually the key to our success, by starting small, but making differences on key areas, small details, but that made the life of using a portfolio tracking app so much easier. That made people not only switch, but actually made them ambassadors of the app almost. So we created this atmosphere of people being fans of Delta and heavily defending it. And this word of mouth viral element also helped us grow in a way.
Yeah, definitely. I'd definitely give you, I'd definitely say that Delta has a very smooth, very seamless user experience, especially compared to some of the earlier applications, such as CoinCap. At the time, you had to manually update each transaction, and it would also crash all the time. So in the early days, there was a lot of apps out there, but most of them weren't really up to par with expectations of what a solid application. So with Delta, you can actually link your exchange, right? So it would track a transaction as you make it on an exchange.
Yeah, so you can either manually add a transaction, or we also have the option to link your read-only API key from the exchange, so we automatically import your transactions. It's also one of the few, I think Delta was one of the first apps to do this, and especially in a way that was as smooth as possible, and with a way where we could actually fetch all transactions individually. So, for instance, if you connect all your exchanges and then go to the desktop application of Delta, then you can actually export a CSV of all your transactions. You'll already have a basic report of all your transactions, which is great for tax reasons and everything. So it's, again, these small nuances that actually, I wouldn't call this a small nuance, but it was a big project, the exchange connections. But it's those things that, again, made Delta stood and stand apart as today as well.
Great. And something that's sort of a part of that I wanted to get into was security, both in terms of the user and in terms of Delta as a company, and how you guys manage user data. So with the exchange, it does use the exchange read-only API. So I guess it can only read data. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you guys manage security at Delta as far as managing user data, and I guess some best practices for individuals that are using the app that can partake as far as being secure and not getting their account hacked.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things, and especially in case of the exchange connections, like I mentioned, the read-only keys is one thing, but we actually go a step further and say if you enter a key that has more access rights than read-only, we actually refuse the key. So we do not want anything to do with it if it has trade rights or even withdrawal or deposits access rights. So we already protect the user on our side. Secondly, we also don't store the API keys on our server, so it's completely client-side. This has some advantages and disadvantages. The advantages, of course, is security. So basically, it's never transferred to our server, so there's no possibility for a man-in-the-middle attack, even though it's read-only, but imagine that would be the case. The disadvantage is, of course, if you uninstall the app, since it's client-side, or you go to a new device, you have to re-enter it. So that's definitely something where there's disadvantage. And then I would also say that we also don't do accounts right now. So there's no way for anybody to link any user data with a person. So everything is completely anonymized. And then, of course, as a company, we have all the security measures in place. I'm not an engineer myself, but I do know that we have the best people and the best partners with us to make sure that there's no possibility of any breach in any way.
Great. So that's great to hear that you guys are taking these measures. And something that I didn't get to was when we were talking about growth is I wanted to ask, what's the size of the team? It seems like we started off, it was the two co-founders, and now it's obviously grown. So how many people are working on Delta today?
I would say 15-ish. I think is we have. It's hard to say because there are some part-time people, which is, yeah, if you count them together, it's one person. But we have most of the people in our office in Ghent, which is in Belgium, and then we also have people all around the world helping with community and customer support. So people in Norway, Australia, the Netherlands, etc. Canada as well.
And a question sort of I have is Delta is a portfolio tracker. You provide a free service to users. So is the way you make money through your sort of upgraded service, and what is that have?
Yeah, so when we launched Delta in October, we already very clearly said, okay, we are not in the data business, as in we are not going to share user data with third parties, let alone sell it. So that's a promise we made, and it's very clearly stated on our privacy policy, and we live by that promise. So we had to, as a company, of course, make revenue, and that's why we introduced Delta Pro. So I would say that 95% of the application is completely free, and for 95% of the users or even more, the free feature set is completely enough to do everything you want. And compared to our competitors, there's nothing you can do, or basically there's nothing you can do on that app that you couldn't do in the free version of Delta. So Delta Pro tries to deliver value for people that want to go that step further. So we have, for instance, things like extra portfolio analytic modules, the ability to sync an unlimited amount of wallets and exchanges, where free users are limited to 4 in total. We also have some more gimmicky things, like we have a light mode and a dark mode, but we have this uber dark mode, which is entirely black, which is only for pro users. And that's how we try to approach it. It's a mix of people really needing this feature, or people wanting to support Delta's development, or being an ambassador and saying, okay, these guys, $60 a year, it's like less than $5 a month. Let's just support them and make sure that Delta can keep going.
Great. And yeah, I'd say that the free version is also, like you said, definitely enough to cover majority of people for the basic needs of tracking their cryptocurrency. So we talked about portfolio trackers when you started. You discussed Delta Direct, and I guess I want to get into discussing some of the portfolio trackers that are sort of the top ones today. And also something that I don't think we discussed was Blockfolio Signal and how that compares to Delta Direct. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the comparison between Delta Direct and Blockfolio Signal.
Well, I think they're trying to solve the same problem, which is basically how do you bring direct communication from token teams to the user. I think the problem is the same, and we try to solve it in a similar way, but with different approaches. And I think for Delta, especially with our 2.0 release, we try to bring it in a way that it makes sense for the user by making sure they get the news the fastest. So by allowing token teams to, on the one hand, send custom not notification, but custom updates to the app. And at the same time, we link with their Medium or Steemit or RS blogs to make sure that once they have a new post, it automatically gets feeded into the app. Because what we see is how most token teams work is they have something to share, they make a blog post, and then they go to 10 different platforms and have to push it there. So we try to take a step away from them and say, okay, we don't need you to go log into our thing and send a custom thing just for saying you have a new blog post. We just link with it directly. It's much faster and easier for the token team, so it's a win-win. And other than that, we also wanted to make sure that we include everyone. I think Blockfolio Signal started in a way that they handpicked or cherry-picked the teams they thought were high standard and were delivering on some criteria, which I don't know, but it was more a process of selection and approval. Whereas when we launched Delta Direct, we said, okay, I think it's not our job to decide which teams are doing what they say, or I think the investor needs to know, and everybody should be included. And I think Blockfolio also came to the same conclusion. So after Delta Direct launched, they changed this strategy and also basically opened the gates to get as much teams involved as possible. But I would say that both Signals and Delta Direct are perfectly fine in basically solving the problem, and it's just a matter of taste. I think it's fairly similar, and it basically depends on what app you use. I wouldn't say that Direct will make you switch to Delta suddenly, or that Signals will make you switch from Delta to Blockfolio. It's just a nice added value for the people already using it.
Great. And for the listeners watching this, OST is also on both Delta Direct and Blockfolio Signal. If you guys want to sign up for our updates, I think it's a great way, if you already use the app, to sign up directly and get notified right away when there are updates that happen. So I think last I checked, a couple months ago, I saw a post that you had 200 token teams on Delta Direct. So is there sort of an updated number as far as how many token teams you have?
I think we're at 375 now, if I'm not mistaken, but it's close to that number. So we definitely are adding teams. We get submissions every day. We have people asking teams to join. So yeah, it's definitely a snowball effect. And of course, at some point it will end, because I would say that from the 275 teams, most of them are part of the top 100 and market cap, or at least the top 250. So yeah, I think it's going well, and we try to add as many token teams as possible. The only problem sometimes is that lots, or not lots, but some token teams are completely decentralized, and then it's hard to say, okay, this person is actually pushing the updates in terms of news, and that sometimes make it, there's no one person that has a blog or an update about Bitcoin, for instance, as it's a completely decentralized cryptocurrency.
Great, and as we end the podcast, I wanted to get into sort of growth and some advice that you may have for other projects in the space that are sort of pushing through crypto winter and trying to keep their heads above the water as far as working on their project and hopefully achieving growth. So what have been some major challenges with Delta Direct, and how have you overcome them as a company?
For Delta Direct, there weren't many challenges, to be honest. I think it went way better than we expected ourselves. And I think we also have to thank Blockfolio for a bit, because normally the biggest challenge would be to educate people or token teams on what it actually represents or what it does, what problems it's solving. But that part was already kind of done for us. So we basically were able to go to the token team saying, okay, we have this direct line to communication to investors. We hope to make a difference by allowing not only for you to interact with your existing investors, but also allow you to get discovered by potential new investors. And then, yeah, it was a no-brainer for all parties involved, user, Delta, and the token team. And I think we can build on this, and I think Delta 2.0 will do just that, basically.
Great, and something else, I guess, in regards to blockchain teams or blockchain company teams, in regards to asset management, another major challenge was the unpredictability of the future. And some major teams had a huge decline in their basically funds to run the company due to poor asset management. Was this? I guess this is something that would be more common in companies that raise money in cryptocurrency. Was this something that affected you guys in any way?
Not at all, actually, because like I said, our Delta Pro model is completely B2C. So we are not dependent on the business of other businesses. I would say we are looking into doing some small amount of partnerships with companies, but it's not our main revenue stream. Delta itself was also funded with purely internally, so all the co-founders, and that is still the same. So there's no external party involved at all. So yeah, for us it's actually a non-issue. The only thing, of course, is the market does indirectly affect us in that sense that if the market is not as bullish as it should be, then basically then we do see that there's less usage and less people signing up, and that means that there are less people signing up to become pro. So there is an indirect link of the markets and of course the revenue.
Great. So it seems like you're more on a traditional business model, and that's great. So I guess one last thing to end the show is do you have any advice for any other crypto projects out there that are sort of building an application, or I guess in addition to that, anything else you like to go over or mention?
Well, what I always try to say is that I think what helped Delta a lot is by just being very communicative towards the cryptocurrency space, because I think the crypto space is quite unique in that sense that for us it was a breath of fresh air to see that how you could directly interact with the people that are using your product or using or believing in what you do or giving active feedback. And I think it's something very unique to this space. So definitely use that. Just go to Reddit, to Telegram, and try to be as open as possible. Completely, even I remember that in the growth times, people would call us crazy for sharing internal growth numbers and everything. But I really believe that by showing everything, people got this appreciation for how we worked, and of course this combined with the fact that we were constantly developing and constantly releasing. Instead of saying, okay, we're working on something and you don't hear from us for 6 months, we were saying, okay, every month we have something new, and we split up our releases in chunks, so we always have something to show for and something to deliver. And I think if people notice that you're working hard and being communicative in an open and transparent way, then they'll become actually your channel for marketing in some way, and it's entirely free.
Great. So basically, pay attention to what your users are saying. They are using your product, and what the feedback they have does matter towards not only them, but I guess the ongoing users that may come in the future.
Yeah.
So Delta Direct, it's available on Android, iOS, and I guess you have a desktop application.
Yeah, so the app is just called Delta, and you can, and then in the Delta app, you have the option to subscribe for Delta Direct, and indeed, iOS, Android, Mac, Windows, and Linux even, so available everywhere. And you can go to delta.app to download it on any device, and it will lead you to the correct version.
Great. So I'll go ahead and add your website down in the description below for anybody that wants to check it out. And for all of you that are watching live, thank you for joining us today. Sorry for that little glitch that we had on the video camera today. And yeah, be sure to subscribe to OST. We feature industry leaders and industry experts to discuss the latest in blockchain and the current projects that they are working on. We always post our upcoming guests in advance, and we also have a Reddit thread if you have any questions for these guests to ask. So be sure to check that out if you want to ask him a question. Also, feel free to add those in the live chat. We didn't have any questions from viewers today, but thank you all for joining us. And yeah, Nicolas, thank you for joining us on OST Live.
Thank you for having me.